The diamond-encrusted ring caught the chandelier light for a fraction of a second before Catherine Sterling's hand connected with Marcus Hayes's
To a memorable
face.
evening.
The crack of skin on skin silenced 400 people mid-conversation, mid-laugh, mid-champagne sip. Marcus didn't move, didn't raise his hand to his reddening cheek, didn't speak. The liquid dripped from his chin onto the lapel of his target suit, dark spots spreading across the polyester blend like ink blots on a test he hadn't studied for. Catherine's voice cut through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel and twice the cruelty. "Get this garbage man out of my sight before he steals the silverware." Marcus had known this moment would come eventually. Not the specifics, not the exact words, but the confrontation itself. He'd seen Catherine Sterling at the Grandview Hotel 3 weeks ago, watched her berate a housekeeper for leaving a water glass half an inch from where Catherine thought it should be. The housekeeper had been 72 years old, hands shaking from arthritis. Eyes wet with tears she refused to let fall in front of her tormentor. Marcus had been pushing his janitor's cart past the open door of Suite 1847, invisible in his gray uniform with the hotel logo stitched over the breast pocket. Catherine hadn't seen him. People like Catherine never saw people like him. 6 hours earlier, Marcus had been in the basement locker room of the Grandview changing out of that same gray uniform. Raymond Jackson stood at the adjacent locker, already in his street clothes, shaking his head with the exasperated affection of a man who'd stopped trying to understand his friend's choices. "You really going through with this?" Marcus pulled the white dress shirt from its plastic Target bag, still creased from the packaging. The shirt cost $11. His watch, the only item he wore that cost more than a week's wages for most of the hotel staff, stayed in his locker. He replaced it with a Timex he'd bought at a drugstore for $19.99. "Elena made me promise." Raymond's face softened at the name. He'd met Elena Hayes twice, both times in this same locker room when she'd come to pick Marcus up after his overnight shifts. The second time had been 6 months before she died, her body already betraying her skin pale and drawn tight over bones that seemed to be trying to escape. She'd still smiled at Raymond, asked about his daughter's college applications, remembered that his mother was recovering from hip surgery. "She'd want you to be happy, man. Not torturing yourself 3 nights a week mopping floors. You could buy the whole damn hotel if you wanted." Marcus buttoned the shirt slowly, each button a small meditation. "This isn't torture. This is remembering." He didn't elaborate. Ray had heard the whole story before, multiple times, but Marcus knew that hearing and understanding were different countries separated by an ocean most people never crossed. Elena had grown up in a studio apartment in the Bronx, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always keep the lights on. She put herself through community college, then state school, then a master's program in public health, all while working nights at that same homeless shelter where she'd later volunteer every Saturday morning. When she'd met Marcus, he'd already sold his first startup for $47 million. She'd been unimpressed by the money, fascinated by the algorithm, and completely unmoved by his attempts to buy her affection with expensive dinners and Broadway shows. Their third date had been at a soup kitchen in Brooklyn. She'd handed him an apron and put him to work chopping vegetables for 6 hours. At the end of the shift, hands cramping and back aching, he'd understood something he'd never grasped in all his years of writing code and pitching investors. There was a kind of tired that felt good, that felt earned, that felt real in a way his startup exhaustion never had. The locker room door opened, and Raymond's replacement, a kid named Marcus, who'd only been with the hotel for 3 months, stuck his head in. "Yo, Mr. Hayes, you want me to cover your section tonight? I could use the overtime." Marcus shook his head, pulling on the suit jacket that matched the pants he'd bought from the same Target run. The whole outfit had cost him $63, including tax. "No need. I'll be back Sunday night, usual time." The kid nodded and disappeared. Raymond watched Marcus adjust his tie in the small mirror mounted inside his locker door.
You know they're gonna recognize you eventually. Someone's gonna put it together, see your face on a Forbes cover or some shit.
Marcus had thought about this possibility extensively. His company, Health Tech AI, had been profiled in every major business publication over the past 3 years. His face was attached to his name in approximately 4 million Google image results. But there was a strange blindness that came with context. A man in a janitor's uniform pushing a mop cart existed in one category of human being. A man in a $1,000 suit giving a TED Talk existed in another. Most people's brains never built the bridge between the two. If they do, they do. It's not about hiding. Then what's it about? Marcus closed his locker, spun the combination lock. It's about showing up. He left Raymond shaking his head in the basement and took the service elevator up to the lobby, then walked 6 blocks to where he'd parked his car. Not the Tesla that sat in his garage at home, but a 12-year-old Honda Civic he'd bought off Craigslist for $4,000 cash. The car had 193,000 miles on it, a crack in the windshield and upholstery that smelled faintly of French fries no matter how many times he'd cleaned it. He loved this car more than he'd ever loved the Tesla. The drive from the hotel to his house in Connecticut took 47 minutes. He used the time to call Sophie. His daughter's voice exploded through the car speakers with the unbridled enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could sustain. Daddy, Grandma made cookies, but she put raisins in them. Raisins, Daddy. In cookies. That's basically a crime. Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders release for the first time since he'd clocked out. What kind of monster puts raisins in cookies? Exactly. Sophie's indignation was perfect, pure unmarred by the knowledge that the world contained much worse crimes than oatmeal raisin cookies. When are you coming home? I have to go to that party tonight, remember? The one Mommy used to like going to. The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds. When Sophie spoke again, her voice had shifted into something smaller, something that made Marcus's chest tighten. The fancy one. With the museum. That's the one. Did you clean the floors really good today? This question, asked every time he came home from the hotel, was their ritual. Elena had started it back when she was still alive and well enough to stay up waiting for him after his overnight shifts. Did you clean the floors really good today, Marcus? Did you see people? Did you help anyone? The questions weren't about the cleanliness of the floors. They were about whether he'd been present, whether he'd allowed himself to be seen, whether he'd looked people in the eye and treated them like they mattered. I cleaned them so good they could eat off them. Mommy would be proud. The words hit him like a fist to the sternum. Yeah, baby. She would be. Grandma says you should wear your nice suit. The one with the fancy buttons. I'm wearing my nice suit. The Target one? Marcus smiled despite himself. The Target one. Good. Mommy always said that suit looked handsome on you. This was a lie. A beautiful lie. A lie Sophie had constructed because she was 8 and she wanted her father to be happy, and she'd learned that sometimes you built the truth you needed from the pieces of memory you had left. Elena had never seen this suit. She'd been dead for 2 years and 3 months and 17 days, and the suit had been purchased 4 months ago from a strip mall in Stamford. She was right. Mommy was always right. When you come home, can we have pancakes? It's going to be late, sweetheart. You'll be asleep. Sophie's voice dropped into a whisper, conspiratorial and sticky sweet with manipulation. But what if I'm not asleep? What if I'm just pretending to be asleep, but really I'm awake, waiting for pancakes? Then I guess I'll have to make pancakes at midnight. Yes! Sophie's victory was absolute. Okay. Grandma's calling me. She wants me to help set the table even though it's just us and we're eating pizza. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, baby. More than anything in the world. The call ended. Marcus drove the rest of the way home in silence,
No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of the Honda's engine and the thoughts spinning through his head like clothes in a dryer set to permanent press. His mother was waiting in the kitchen when he arrived, wearing the expression she'd perfected over the past 2 years, concern wrapped in forced cheerfulness, tied with a bow of barely suppressed criticism. "Marcus, are you sure about this? Going back to that museum after last year?" "Nothing happened last year, Mom. I just attended a gala." His mother's lips compressed into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. "You stood in a corner by yourself for 3 hours watching people. That's not attending, that's surveilling." She wasn't wrong. Last year's gala had been reconnaissance, though he hadn't thought of it in those terms at the time. He'd bought a ticket through a shell company, arrived late, left early, and spent the entire evening observing, watching who spoke to whom, who got ignored, how the servers were treated when they thought no one was watching. He'd seen Catherine Sterling tell a waiter to get his immigrant ass back to the kitchen. He'd seen Jonathan Sterling deliberately trip a photographer and then laugh about it. He'd seen Vanessa Sterling pose for selfies with sick children, while her assistant literally held a bottle of hand sanitizer, dispensing it the moment each photo op ended. He'd seen enough. "I'll be fine." Marcus kissed his mother's forehead. "Sophie wants midnight pancakes when I get home." His mother's expression softened fractionally. "That child has you wrapped around her little finger, just the way her mother did." The Metropolitan Museum rose from Fifth Avenue like a temple to civilization, all columns and stairs, and the weight of centuries pressing down on the present. Marcus had been here dozens of times, back when Elena was alive, and they'd spent Sunday afternoons wandering the Egyptian wing, while Sophie demanded to know why all the mummies didn't have names. She'd been 4 then, young enough to believe that every question had an answer, and every problem had a solution. The gala transformed the museum into something else entirely. Spotlights swept across the facade. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers who looked bored and cold in equal measure. Black town cars and limousines queued up to disgorge passengers dripping in designer labels and casual wealth. Marcus parked the Honda 3 blocks away, fed the meter with quarters, and walked to the museum. No town car, no driver, no entrance designed to announce his arrival. He joined the line of ticket holders, the ones who'd paid the $10,000 per plate but hadn't rated a special entrance or a pre-gala cocktail reception. The security checkpoint was managed by a company Marcus recognized. He'd vetted them 2 months ago when he'd been considering a partnership with their parent corporation. The guard checking invitations was Raymond Jackson's cousin, also named Raymond, who went by Ray to avoid confusion. Marcus had met him exactly once at the elder Raymond's birthday party 6 months ago. Ray's eyes flicked from the invitation to Marcus's face and back again. The recognition was instantaneous, a flash of surprise quickly suppressed into professional neutrality. "Evening, Mr. Hayes." "Evening, Ray. Didn't expect to see you here tonight. Makes 2 of us." Ray's mouth twitched toward a smile before he caught himself. "You have a good night, sir." Marcus moved through the checkpoint into the museum's transformed interior. The main hall had been converted into something between a ballroom and a showcase for exactly how much money could be spent on a single evening. Ice sculptures melted slowly under the heat of 1,000 bodies and twice as many lights. Champagne flowed from fountains that seemed designed solely to prove that champagne could, in fact, flow from fountains. The flower arrangements were taller than most of the guests and probably cost more than the annual salary of the people who'd arranged them. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, a young woman whose name tag identified her as Jennifer. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second, long enough for Marcus to see the exhaustion beneath the professional smile, before moving on to offer drinks to a cluster of guests who took the glasses without acknowledging her existence. Marcus found a position near one of the refreshment tables, a spot that offered a clear view of the room, but positioned him slightly outside the main flow of traffic. From here, he could observe without being observed present, but not participating exactly the way he'd planned it. The Sterling family arrived fashionably late, which was to say exactly on time, in the way that only people with generational wealth could manage. They entered as a unit, a show of dynastic force that drew eyes and cameras in equal measure. Catherine Sterling led the procession, 73 years old and surgically maintained to look 20 years younger from a distance, wearing a dress that probably cost more than the Honda parked 3 blocks away. Her son Jonathan flanked her right all-square jaw and practiced confidence, the kind of man who'd been told he was destined for greatness so many times he'd stopped questioning whether the prophecy was true. Vanessa Sterling. Jonathan's younger sister worked the left side phone already documenting their arrival for the 3.2 million followers who tracked her every move. Behind them, moving with the careful dignity of a man who'd learned to weaponize respectability, came Senator Richard Sterling. 74 silver-haired, 6 terms in the Senate and counting. His cane was silver-topped mahogany, pure affectation since Marcus had watched him walk half a mile across a parking lot the previous month without the slightest sign of difficulty. And finally, the patriarch. Edward Sterling III, 88 years old, $4 billion to his name, and the unsettling stillness of a man who'd spent 6 decades making other people flinch first. He moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water, polite and predatory in equal measure. Marcus watched them work the room. Catherine held court near the ice sculptures, accepting compliments on her dress, her jewelry, her continued commitment to children's cancer research, despite her incredibly busy schedule. Jonathan networked with the efficiency of a man who'd been taught that every conversation was a potential business opportunity. Vanessa posed and posted, her phone a permanent extension of her hand. Senator Richard collected political favors disguised as casual conversation. Edward observed it all with the satisfaction of a man watching a machine he'd built run exactly as designed. None of them noticed Marcus. The moment arrived without warning, the way car crashes and heart attacks and revelations always did. Marcus had shifted position, moving from the refreshment table toward a slightly better vantage point near the entrance to the Egyptian wing. He wasn't trying to be noticed, wasn't trying to hide, was simply existing in the space he occupied. Catherine Sterling turned from her conversation with the museum director, champagne glass in hand, and her eyes locked onto Marcus's face. The recognition came in stages. First, the vague familiarity of a face seen before but not placed. Second, the context snapping into focus. The hotel, the hallway, the janitor's cart. Third, the outrage, pure and immediate and completely divorced from any sense that she might be in the wrong. She moved toward him with a kind of purpose that cleared a path through the crowd, people stepping aside without conscious thought, some primal instinct warning them to get out of the trajectory of whatever was about to happen. Marcus set a champagne glass down on a nearby table. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. Everything Elena had taught him about dignity and presence and refusing to flinch condensed into this single moment. Catherine stopped 3 feet away, close enough for him to smell her perfume, something French and expensive, and applied with enough enthusiasm to constitute a chemical weapon. You. The word came out like an accusation, like he'd committed some crime by existing in her line of sight. Ma'am, what are you doing here? The champagne throw happened before Marcus could answer. The glass left her hand with the practiced ease of someone who'd thrown things at people before, liquid arcing through the air in slow motion, catching the light from the chandeliers before it hit his face. Cold and wet and humiliating, designed to reduce him to something less than human in front of 400 witnesses. The slap followed half a second later. Catherine's diamond ring caught the light for a fraction of a second before her hand connected with his face. "How dare you show your face at this event?" The crowd's response rippled outward from their position at the center. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, cameras already recording before their owners had fully processed what they were witnessing. Marcus wiped champagne from his eyes with the back of his hand. He said nothing. "I asked you a question." Catherine's voice climbed toward shrieking, each word carefully enunciated to carry across the suddenly silent ballroom. "How dare you show your face at this event, ma'am? I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Catherine's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "I know exactly who you are. You're the janitor from the Grandview Hotel. I've seen you mopping floors in that ridiculous uniform." She wasn't wrong. Marcus did work as a janitor at the Grandview 3 nights a week, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cleaning the same floors Catherine had walked across without ever looking down. "Yes, ma'am, I work at the Grandview." "Then what in God's name are you doing here?" Catherine gestured at the opulent surroundings with her now empty champagne glass, the crystal catching light and throwing rainbows across her fury-twisted features. "This is a $10,000 a plate charity dinner, not a soup kitchen." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to see that he was reaching for something harmless. Catherine flinched backward anyway, her body language screaming assault before he'd done anything more threatening than reach for an envelope. "Relax, Mother." Jonathan Sterling appeared at Catherine's side, materializing with the speed of someone who'd been trained since childhood to protect the family's interests. He wore a smirk that suggested he'd never been denied anything in his life, never faced a consequence that couldn't be bought off or intimidated into silence. "What's he going to do? Mop us to death?" Jonathan laughed at his own joke. A few nearby guests joined in nervously, unsure whether they were allowed to find humor in the situation, but unwilling to risk offending a Sterling. Marcus pulled out the envelope. Simple white paper, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth or power. "I have an invitation." "Let me see that." Jonathan snatched the envelope before Marcus could offer it, tearing it open with the aggressive entitlement of someone who'd spent his entire life taking things that weren't his. He scanned the contents, and for a fraction of a second, his smirk flickered. Then it returned, armor against the possibility that he might be wrong. "This is obviously forged." "Mother, look at this pathetic attempt." Catherine examined the invitation with theatrical disdain, holding it at arm's length like it might contaminate her. "Anyone can print something on cardstock. The question is, how did you get past security?" "I walked through the front door." "Impossible." Catherine snapped her fingers at Ray, who'd been standing at his checkpoint trying very hard to become invisible. "You! Come here! Now!" Ray approached with the reluctance of a man walking toward his own execution. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling." "This man." Catherine pointed at Marcus like he was a stain on the carpet, something to be removed and forgotten. "How did he get in here?" Ray looked at Marcus, then back at Catherine. His job hung in the balance. Marcus could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression. "Ma'am, he came through the main entrance. He had a valid invitation. I checked it myself." "Then you're fired." The words landed like a hammer blow. Ray's face went pale, years of professional composure cracking to reveal the panic underneath. "Ma'am, I've worked for this foundation for 12 years. I know a legitimate invitation when I see one." "I said you're fired. Collect your things and leave. I'll have HR send your final paycheck." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between Catherine and Ray. "That's not necessary. This man did nothing wrong." Catherine's head swiveled toward Marcus with predatory intensity. "Excuse me? Are you telling me what is and isn't necessary? I'm saying he was doing his job. His job is to keep people like you out. People like me. Catherine leaned closer, dropping her voice to a hiss that somehow carried to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. Don't play stupid. You know exactly what I mean. The help, the workers, the little people who clean our toilets and serve our food and then scurry back to whatever hole they crawled out of. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, muscle tensing against bone. He forced himself to relax, to breathe, to remember everything Elena had taught him about maintaining dignity in the face of cruelty. I see. No, I don't think you do see. Catherine raised her voice again, performing now for the audience that had gathered in expanding circles around them. You thought you could slip in here and what? Network with your betters? Pocket some hors d'oeuvres for the week? Steal jewelry from the coat check? I came to support the charity. This time, Catherine's laugh was genuine, the sound of someone who'd heard the most ridiculous thing imaginable. Support the charity? You? With what? Your mop and bucket? Mother. Vanessa Sterling pushed through the crowd, phone held high, screen showing a live stream with the viewer count climbing past 8,000. She was already filming, already documenting, already turning her family's cruelty into content for the millions who tracked her every move. Oh my God, Mother. What's happening? My followers are losing their minds. Vanessa turned the camera toward Marcus, getting a close-up of champagne still dripping from his hair onto his suit jacket. The comments section exploded with reactions, most of them exactly what Marcus expected. Mockery, cruelty, the casual dehumanization that came so easily when the target was far away and the consequences were nil. This, Catherine announced to the camera, to the crowd, to the world, is what happens when security gets lazy. Some janitor decided he deserved to breathe the same air as actual donors. Marcus watched the comments scroll past on Vanessa's screen. Each one a small cruelty, death by 1,000 cuts, designed to reduce him to something less than human. He reached up and wiped more champagne from his face, careful and deliberate, refusing to let them see him hurry. You're getting my daughter's Valentino dress wet. Catherine's voice had climbed into registers previously only accessible to dogs and opera singers. That's a $40,000 garment. I apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience? You've ruined my entire evening. I'm the chair of this foundation's board. I've spent 6 months planning this gala, and now I have to deal with some intruder who doesn't know his place. Jonathan moved closer, near enough that Marcus could smell whiskey on his breath, could see the glassy shine in his eyes that suggested this wasn't his first drink of the evening, probably wasn't his 10th. You know what I think? I think we should search him. Check his pockets, see what he's stolen. I haven't stolen anything. That's exactly what a thief would say. Jonathan reached for Marcus's jacket, hands already moving to grab and search and violate the basic boundaries of personal space. Marcus caught Jonathan's wrist mid-reach, grip firm but not aggressive, applying just enough pressure to stop the motion without causing pain. Please don't touch me. Jonathan's eyes widened, shock and humiliation blooming across his features in real time. He tried to pull free, couldn't, his face flushing red with the sudden realization that he wasn't the strongest person in this interaction. Let go of my son. Catherine's shriek could have shattered the champagne glasses, could have cracked the ice sculptures, could have registered on seismographs in neighboring states. Marcus released Jonathan's wrist immediately. Jonathan stumbled backward, rubbing his arm like he'd been burned, like he'd touched something toxic and needed to scrub off the contamination. Did you see that? Jonathan pointed at Marcus with his other hand, voice climbing toward his mother's octave.
He assaulted me. That's assault. Someone call the police. I didn't assault anyone. I asked you not to touch me. You grabbed me. Mother, he grabbed me. Catherine's face had gone white with rage, all the blood draining away to leave something marble-like and cold. That's it. Charles, get over here.
Senator Richard Sterling emerged from the crowd with the careful dignity of a man who'd spent 4 decades in politics, learning to assess situations before committing to a response. He walked with his silver-topped cane, each step measured, each movement calculated for maximum gravitas. What seems to be the problem, Victoria? Marcus filed away the slip. Victoria. Catherine's middle name, the one she'd abandoned when she married into the Sterling dynasty. The senator was old enough, had known her long enough, to remember who she'd been before the money and the surgery and the carefully constructed persona. This man. Catherine pointed at Marcus, her fingers shaking with rage or adrenaline or some combination of both. This janitor crashed our gala and just assaulted Jonathan. Senator Sterling studied Marcus with the cold assessment of a man who'd spent 40 years learning to categorize people instantly, to determine their value and their threat level in the time it took to shake hands. His gaze traveled from Marcus's wet hair to his target suit to his scuffed dress shoes, taking inventory, building a file, preparing for whatever move came next. I see. The senator pulled out his phone, an iPhone in a leather case that probably cost more than Marcus's entire outfit. I'll have this handled. I didn't assault anyone. Marcus kept his voice calm, kept his hands visible, kept everything about his posture non-threatening. He tried to search me without my consent. I stopped him. Young man. The senator's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of power that came from knowing exactly how much influence you wielded and being unafraid to use it. I'm going to give you one chance to walk out of here quietly. If you do, we'll forget this ever happened. If you don't, I'll have you arrested for trespassing, assault, and whatever else my lawyers can make stick. Marcus met the senator's gaze, didn't blink, didn't look away, refused to give ground in this battle of wills playing out in front of 400 witnesses and Vanessa's growing live stream audience. With respect, Senator, I have every right to be here. I have a valid invitation to this event. Invitations can be forged. This one wasn't. Then how did you afford it? Catherine's voice cut across the exchange, sharp and cruel and absolutely certain of her righteousness. $10,000 a plate. That's probably more than you make in 3 months cleaning toilets. Marcus didn't answer. What could he say that they'd believe? What explanation would penetrate the wall of certainty they'd built around their assumptions? That's what I thought. Catherine turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease, every word designed to humiliate and dismiss. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. This man apparently decided that working at a hotel gave him the right to crash our event. Security will be removing him shortly. Vanessa's live stream had climbed to 47,000 viewers, the number rising with each passing second. The comments section had devolved into a feeding frenzy of mockery and cruelty, people competing to come up with the most creative insults, the most cutting observations, the most humiliating suggestions for what should happen next. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, then again, and again, and again. The frequency increased with each passing second, a drumbeat of incoming notifications that suggested something was happening outside this ballroom, some domino effect he hadn't anticipated. Oh, is that your drug dealer? Jonathan's sneer had returned, bolstered by his mother's support and the crowd's attention. Someone wondering why you're not at your corner, Jonathan? Marcus's voice was quiet, barely audible over the ambient noise of 400 people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. But something in it made Jonathan take a step back, some quality that suggested danger lurking beneath the calm surface. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me, and yet you've decided I'm a criminal because I work a job you consider beneath you? Because it is beneath me. Jonathan's voice climbed defensively, trying to reclaim the moral high ground through volume and indignation. It's beneath all of us. I see. Marcus reached up and straightened his wet tie, taking his time, each movement deliberate and controlled. And what do you do, Jonathan? For work, I mean. Jonathan's face reddened, blood rushing back to fill the spaces fear had temporarily vacated.
I'm the Executive Vice President of Development at Sterling Medical Supply. Impressive title. What do you actually do? I develop strategic initiatives for... Your mother gave you that job, didn't she? And your grandfather put up the money to start the company. What have you actually built? What have you created? What have you accomplished that wasn't handed to you? The ballroom went silent, conversation dying in waves as people processed what they were hearing. Even Vanessa's live stream comments slowed, the endless scroll of cruelty pausing as viewers waited to see what would happen next. Catherine stepped forward, hand raised for another slap, another assault, another public degradation designed to put Marcus back in what she considered his place. How dare you speak to my son that way? This time, Marcus caught her wrist before the blow landed, gently but firmly, stopping the motion without causing pain, maintaining his dignity while refusing to be hit again. Mrs. Sterling, I've allowed you to assault me once tonight. I won't allow it again. Let go of me when you lower your hand. Catherine's eyes bulged, her face contorting with rage and disbelief, and the dawning realization that this situation was spiraling beyond her control. This is assault, Charles. He's assaulting me. Senator Sterling moved forward, cane raised like a weapon, all pretense of dignity abandoned in favor of protecting family interests. Release my daughter immediately. Marcus released Catherine's wrist. She stumbled backward into Jonathan's arms, cradling her wrist like it was broken, like he'd done something more than stop her from hitting him a second time. He hurt me, Jonathan. He hurt me. I barely touched you. That's a lie. Catherine addressed the crowd, tears now streaming down her face, mascara running in black rivulets that destroyed her carefully constructed appearance. Tears that Marcus recognized as performance, as manipulation, as a weapon deployed when physical assault hadn't achieved the desired result. You've all seen what he did. This man broke into our charity event and attacked me. Someone do something! The museum director hurried over, a thin man in his 60s, whose face had flushed the deep red of someone experiencing a panic attack in real time. His name was Gerald, Marcus remembered. Gerald Thompson, 23 years running the museum, absolutely terrified of offending the Sterling family's generosity. What's happening, Mrs. Sterling? What's going on? This criminal attacked me. Arrest him. Call the police. Do something. Gerald looked at Marcus with obvious discomfort, the expression of a man trapped between competing moral obligations and choosing the one that would keep him employed. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I have an invitation. Yes, well, regardless of that, you've clearly upset our primary donor. Your primary donor? Marcus raised an eyebrow, the gesture slight but weighted with implication. Is that what she is? The Sterling family has donated over $20 million to this foundation over the past decade. Gerald's voice carried the desperate edge of someone justifying a decision he knew was wrong but felt powerless to change. Their support is vital to our mission of helping children with cancer. Marcus nodded slowly, taking in this information, processing it, filing it away for future use. I see. And because of that, she can assault guests, humiliate workers, have innocent security guards fired? Sir, please. I'm trying to avoid involving law enforcement. No. Catherine pushed forward, mascara streaked and furious, all pretense of civilized behavior abandoned. No, I want him arrested. Charles, call the commissioner. I want this man prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Senator Sterling was already dialing, the phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping into the authoritative tones he used when calling in favors. Commissioner Martinez? Richard Sterling. We have a situation at the Metropolitan Children's Cancer Foundation Gala. Possible assault, definitely trespassing. I need officers here immediately. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and again. The frequency had increased to the point where it was almost continuous, a steady vibration against his ribs that suggested his digital life was currently exploding. Vanessa moved closer, shoving her phone in Marcus's face, the camera capturing every detail in high definition for the 93,000 people now watching her live stream. Any last words before they drag you off to jail? My followers want to know. Marcus looked directly into the camera. His face was calm, almost serene, champagne still glistening in his graying hair. His cheap suit was stained and wrinkled. He looked exactly like what the Sterling family had accused him of being, a nobody who had wandered into the wrong world. Yes, I have something to say. Vanessa's eyes lit up with the predatory excitement of someone who just captured content gold. Go ahead. Tell us why you thought you could crash a party for your betters. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. The security guards tensed. Jonathan took a step back. Catherine grabbed Senator Sterling's arm, her grip tight enough to leave marks. But Marcus didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a phone, not the cheap flip phone they'd assumed he carried, but something sleek and custom-built, a device that none of them recognized because it was produced in limited quantities for a very specific clientele. Mrs. Sterling. Marcus's voice was still quiet, but somehow it carried across the entire silent ballroom, across the live stream to 93,000 viewers, across the social media platforms where clips were already being shared and reshared again. You asked how I could afford a $10,000 ticket. Because you stole it. Catherine's triumph was immediate, certain, absolute. Or forged it, or... I didn't buy a ticket. Ha! Catherine's vindication could have powered the museum's lights, could have melted the ice sculptures, could have shattered every champagne glass in a 3-block radius. I knew it. He admits he snuck in. Charles, did you hear that? He admits. I didn't buy a ticket. Marcus repeated the words clearly, carefully, making sure every person in the ballroom and every viewer on Vanessa's stream heard him exactly right. Because I donated $30 million to this charity this afternoon, which I believe entitles me to attend their largest annual fundraiser. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Not the silence of shock or surprise, but something deeper. The silence of a world reorganizing itself around new information, fundamental assumptions crumbling to reveal an entirely different reality underneath. Catherine laughed, but the sound was uncertain now. The laugh of someone who'd felt the ground shift beneath her feet and was trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. That's ridiculous. That's insane. The largest donation we've ever received was $12 million, and that was from me. Marcus's voice remained calm, each word landing like a hammer on glass. 4 years ago, anonymously. Vanessa's live stream exploded. The viewer count shot past 120,000.
The comments became incoherent, a digital scream of disbelief and excitement and schadenfreude. "You're lying." Catherine's voice had gone shrill, climbing into ranges that suggested her carefully maintained composure was fracturing in real time. "You're a janitor. You mop floors. I've seen you." "Yes, I mop floors at the Grandview Hotel 3 nights a week." Marcus held up his phone, turning the screen toward Catherine, toward the crowd, toward Vanessa's camera. "I also founded Health Tech AI 6 years ago. It's now the largest healthcare artificial intelligence company in the world." Catherine's face drained of color as she read the screen, as the words on the digital display rewrote everything she thought she knew about the man standing in front of her. Forbes profile, Marcus Hayes, net worth $2.7 billion, founder and CEO, Health Tech AI, employees 18,000, annual revenue $3.1 billion. That's not. Catherine's voice trailed off, her brain trying to process information that contradicted everything she'd assumed, everything she'd believed, everything she'd used to justify her cruelty. Marcus swiped to the next screen, revealing documents that Jonathan would recognize, that Senator Sterling would understand, that would mean nothing to most of the crowd, but everything to the people who mattered. "I also own 34% controlling stake in Sterling Medical Supply's primary raw material supplier, plus exclusive patents on 3 compounds your manufacturing process requires. Alternative suppliers would take approximately 18 months to qualify and approve." Jonathan's smirk had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked like nausea, like the moment before someone throws up from fear rather than illness. "What? Your company can't manufacture a single product without materials from my supply chain?" Marcus swiped again, showing more documents, more evidence, more proof that he wasn't what they'd assumed, wasn't what they'd needed him to be to justify their treatment of him. "I also own significant positions in your family's real estate holdings, your shipping contracts, and your pharmaceutical distribution network." Senator Sterling lowered his phone slowly, the call to the commissioner forgotten, his decades of political instinct screaming warnings about exactly how badly this situation had deteriorated. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Marcus turned the screen toward the senator, toward the man who'd spent 40 years learning to read leverage and power dynamics, and the exact moment when a situation had become unrecoverable. "Perhaps you'd like to see the records of your campaign contributions over the last 6 election cycles. $12 million from various PACs, all of which trace back to holding companies I control." The senator went pale, all the blood draining from his face to pool somewhere around his feet, leaving him looking like a statue carved from marble and regret. "But those contributions were from you? Anonymous? Untraceable?" Marcus finished the sentence with the calm precision of someone who'd known this information for months, who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to deploy it. Until now. Vanessa's live stream had hit 180,000 viewers, the number climbing so fast it was almost a blur. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone, the camera image wobbling and jumping as she tried to process what was happening, tried to understand how her content had transformed from mockery to something else entirely. Catherine grasped for her last weapon, for the one thing that might make sense of this situation, that might restore order to a world that had tilted so far off its axis it was in danger of spinning into the sun. "Why?" Her voice was small now, all the performance stripped away to reveal genuine confusion underneath. "Why would a billionaire work as a janitor? Why would you hide? This doesn't make any sense." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, looked at all of them,
at this family that had built an empire on the backs of people they'd never bothered to see, never bothered to value, never bothered to treat as human. Then he reached into his pocket again and pulled out a worn photograph, creased from years of being carried and touched and looked at during moments when the weight of grief became too heavy to bear alone. A little girl, 8 years old, brown hair, gap-toothed smile, standing next to a woman with the same hair and the same smile, but tired, thin, clearly ill. My wife, Elena. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, the first break in his composure since Catherine had thrown champagne in his face. She died of ovarian cancer 2 years ago. My daughter Sophie. She was 6 when we lost her mother. The ballroom had become a tomb. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Vanessa's live stream comments had slowed to a trickle, viewers watching something that had transcended entertainment and become something else entirely. Elena made me promise something before she died. Marcus held the photograph carefully, reverently, like it was the most valuable thing in the world, because it was. She said, "Marcus, don't let Sophie grow up thinking money makes her better than other people. Don't let her become like the families we used to envy. Make sure she knows that kindness matters more than status, that work has dignity, that every person deserves respect, regardless of their job or their bank account." He tucked the photograph carefully back into his pocket, each movement deliberate and controlled. So I work as a janitor 3 nights a week. I bring Sophie with me sometimes, on weekends when the hotel is quiet. She helps me empty trash cans and mop floors. She's learning that there's nothing shameful about honest work. Catherine's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. All her eloquence and cruelty and carefully constructed superiority reduced to silence. Tonight she's home with her grandmother. She wanted to come to the gala. She loves fancy parties, but I told her it wasn't a place for kids. Marcus's voice hardened almost imperceptibly, the temperature in the ballroom dropping several degrees as his words cut through the silence. Now I'm glad she didn't come, because I wouldn't have wanted her to see how some people treat workers, how they speak to people they consider beneath them, what they reveal about themselves when they think they have all the power. He looked directly at Catherine, his gaze unwavering, unforgiving, absolute. "You ask me why I was here, Mrs. Sterling? I'm here because my wife died of the disease this charity was created to fight. I'm here because I've given over $50 million to cancer research over the past 4 years. I'm here because my daughter's best friend is currently in treatment at the hospital this foundation supports." Catherine's legs gave out. She sat down heavily on the nearest chair, her Valentino gown pooling around her like a silk puddle, all the fight draining out of her to leave something empty and small. "I'm also here because I wanted to see who was running this foundation. Who was deciding how the money was spent? Who was representing the mission of helping sick children?" Marcus surveyed the crowd slowly, his gaze touching each face, marking each person who'd watched the assault and said nothing, who'd laughed at Jonathan's jokes, who'd participated in his humiliation through their silence. Now I know. Senator Sterling fumbled with his phone, the screen displaying Commissioner Martinez's contact information, but his thumb hovered over the end call button without pressing it. The ballroom had transformed into something between a courtroom and a confessional. 400 witnesses holding their breath, while Marcus Hayes stood at the center like a judge waiting for the guilty to speak. Marcus straightened his wet tie one final time, smoothed down his stained jacket. The charity auction closes in 3 minutes. I was going to bid on the Van Gogh sketch. The proceeds were earmarked for a new pediatric wing. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. but I don't think I will now. I think instead, I'll withdraw my $30 million donation. I think I'll also withdraw the $12 million I gave anonymously 4 years ago, which under the Foundation's charter I'm legally entitled to recover since it was designated for specific programs that were never implemented. Gerald Thompson made a strangled sound, a noise somewhere between a sob and a scream that escaped before he could stop it. Mr. Hayes, please. The Foundation can't survive losing $42 million. We have commitments, staff, ongoing programs. Yes, you do. Marcus's gaze moved to Catherine, still collapsed in her chair, mascara streaking down her face in rivulets of black. Perhaps your board chair should have considered that before assaulting donors in the middle of your biggest fundraiser. He turned and began walking toward the exit, each step measured and deliberate. Behind him, chaos erupted like a dam breaking, all the pressure that had built during his revelation flooding out in a cascade of voices and movement and panic. Catherine was screaming, Jonathan was shouting at Gerald, Senator Sterling was frantically making phone calls. Vanessa's live stream had hit 217,000 viewers and climbing, the comment section a digital wildfire of shock and schadenfreude and desperate attempts to process what they'd just witnessed. Marcus didn't look back. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him like water around a stone, past security guards who stared with wide eyes, past the coat check attendant who'd watched the entire confrontation from her station, past Senator Sterling's aide who was desperately trying to get his attention with increasingly frantic gestures. At the door, he paused. His phone rang, a different tone than the constant buzzing of notifications. He looked at the caller ID and allowed himself the ghost of a smile. White House Situation Room. Someone in the West Wing had been watching Vanessa's live stream, or, more likely, someone on their staff had alerted them to a domestic political crisis in the making. Marcus declined the call. He stepped through the door into the cool November air and began walking down the museum steps. Behind him, through the closing door, he could hear Catherine Sterling's screams echoing through the grand ballroom, the sound of a woman discovering that money and influence had limits, that consequences existed, even for people who'd spent their entire lives believing themselves exempt. Marcus hadn't even reached the bottom step when the doors exploded open behind him. "Mr. Hayes! Mr. Hayes, please, wait!" Gerald's voice cracked with desperation, each word fighting its way past what sounded like an impending cardiac event. Marcus kept walking, his pace unhurried, his destination the Honda parked 3 blocks away, where nobody would think to look for a billionaire. "Please, I'm begging you, just give us 5 minutes." Marcus stopped, but not because of Gerald's plea. 3 black SUVs had just pulled up to the curb in perfect synchronization, blocking his path like chess pieces moved by an invisible hand. The doors opened and people emerged. Not museum security, but something else entirely. Corporate security. Expensive security. The kind of security that wealthy families deployed when regular law enforcement wasn't sufficient. Mr. Hayes. A woman stepped out of the lead vehicle, tall and severe, in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful, her expression carved from granite and decades of cleaning up other people's messes. "I'm Patricia Chen, Chief Legal Counsel for Sterling Holdings. The family would like to speak with you." "I'm sure they would. Please, 5 minutes. That's all they're asking." Marcus turned around slowly, taking in the scene behind him. Gerald was wringing his hands hard enough to leave marks. Through the museum's glass doors, he could see the chaos still unfolding, could see Catherine being helped to her feet by Jonathan and Vanessa, could see Senator Sterling gesturing wildly at someone off to the side. 5 minutes, not a second more. Patricia nodded, her expression revealing nothing. Years of legal training keeping whatever she felt about this situation locked behind professional neutrality. They're waiting in the private boardroom. Marcus climbed the steps again, past Gerald, who looked like he might collapse from relief, past the coat check attendant, whose eyes had gone wide with something between awe and terror. Inside, the crowd parted differently than before. Fear had replaced contempt. People who'd laughed at Jonathan's jokes now couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. Women who'd smiled at Catherine's cruelty now studied their champagne glasses with sudden fascination. The private boardroom was on the second floor, accessible through a service hallway most guests never saw, the kind of space reserved for donors who needed privacy to negotiate the terms of their generosity. Patricia led the way, her heels clicking against marble with military precision, each step echoing in the empty corridor. "I want you to know," she began without turning around, "that I had no involvement in tonight's events. I only learned what happened 3 minutes ago, when someone from our media monitoring team called me in a panic. And yet, here you are. I'm paid to solve problems, Mr. Hayes. Tonight, my clients created a very large problem." She pushed open a heavy oak door and stepped aside, gesturing for Marcus to enter first. The gesture was calculated, Marcus recognized, a small surrender of power, an acknowledgement that the normal rules no longer applied. The Sterling family was waiting inside, arranged around a long conference table like defendants at their own trial. Catherine sat at the head, her ruined makeup hastily repaired but still streaked, still broadcasting the evidence of her breakdown. Jonathan stood behind her, his earlier arrogance replaced by barely concealed panic, hands gripping the back of her chair hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Vanessa huddled in a corner, still clutching her phone, watching her live stream comments scroll with the horrified fascination of someone watching their own funeral. Senator Richard Sterling paced near the window, his silver-topped cane tapping an anxious rhythm against the hardwood floor, each tap a metronome counting down to disaster. And there was someone new, someone Marcus recognized from financial news coverage, from quarterly earnings calls, from the kind of publications that tracked old money and older power. Edward Sterling III, Catherine's father-in-law, the family patriarch, 88 years old, with a net worth that fluctuated between $3.9 and $4.2 billion, depending on market conditions. The man who had built the Sterling empire from nothing, or more accurately, from the nothing that came after inheriting $2 million from his own father and turning it into something that would outlast him. Edward didn't stand when Marcus entered, didn't move at all, just watched with eyes that had seen 1,000 business battles and won most of them, that had outlasted competitors and enemies, and occasionally allies who became one or the other depending on quarterly performance. "Mr. Hayes." Edward's voice was surprisingly strong for a man his age, carrying across the room without effort, without raising volume. The voice of someone who'd learned that power was often quieter than people expected. "Please sit. I'll stand. As you wish." Edward folded his hands on the table, liver-spotted and steady. Hands that had signed contracts worth billions and pink slips for thousands. "I want to begin by offering my deepest apologies for my family's behavior tonight. What they did was inexcusable." Yes, it was. They didn't know who you were. That's not an excuse. Marcus let the words land, let them settle over the room like dust after an explosion. That's the problem. Edward nodded slowly, the gesture of a man acknowledging a point well made, filing it away for future reference. "You're right. Of course you're right. But surely you understand, mistakes were made, but they can be corrected. Surely we can find a way forward that benefits everyone." Marcus looked at Catherine, watched her flinch under his gaze. "Mrs. Sterling, would you like to add anything?" Catherine's mouth trembled,
opening and closing like a fish drowning in air.
She looked at Edward, then at Patricia, then back at Marcus, searching for someone to tell her what to say, how to fix this. What words would make the problem disappear? I'm sorry for what I did, for how I treated you. And how did you treat me? Catherine's eyes filled with tears again, fresh water cutting new channels through her ruined makeup. I threw champagne in your face. I slapped you. I called you. She couldn't finish, the words catching in her throat like broken glass. You called me garbage. Marcus supplied the words she couldn't say, each syllable clean and sharp. You called me trash. You accused me of being a thief, a drug dealer, a criminal. You had an innocent man fired from a job he'd held for 12 years. You tried to have me arrested. Yes. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper, all the volume and performance stripped away to leave something small and broken. I did all of those things. And you did them because you thought I was a janitor. Yes. If I had been just a janitor, if I really had been nothing more than a man who cleans floors for a living, would any of that have been acceptable? Catherine hesitated. Marcus could see her calculating, trying to find the answer he wanted to hear, trying to navigate between honesty and self-preservation. Don't lie to me, Mrs. Sterling. I can always tell when people are lying. Catherine's face crumbled, the last of her composure dissolving like sugar in water. I don't know. I don't know what I would have thought. I saw you and I assumed. You assumed I didn't belong. You assumed I was beneath you. You assumed my presence was an offense to people of your class. Yes. The word came out like a confession, pulled from someone too exhausted to maintain the lie any longer. Yes, I assumed all of those things. And now that you know I'm worth more than your entire family combined, suddenly you want to apologize. Suddenly you want to find a way forward. Suddenly my dignity matters. Mr. Hayes? Edward's voice cut in smoothly, decades of boardroom experience teaching him exactly when to intervene, when to redirect, when to reframe. I understand your anger. I truly do. But let's be practical. We're both businessmen. We both know that emotions make poor foundations for important decisions. Is that what you think this is? Emotions? I think you're understandably upset. Anyone would be. But I also think you're too smart to destroy profitable business relationships over a social misunderstanding. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and humorless, filling the boardroom with something that made Patricia Chen shift uncomfortably near the door. A social misunderstanding. That's what you're calling it? What would you call it? I'd call it exactly what it was. Your family revealed who they really are. Not to me, I've known people like you my whole life, but to the world. 217,000 people watched your daughter-in-law assault me. 217,000 people heard her call me garbage. 217,000 people saw exactly how the Sterling family treats anyone they consider beneath them. Vanessa whimpered in the corner, a small animal sound that escaped before she could stop it. Her phone screen showed the viewer count still climbing, 243,000 now, the number rising faster than she could process. That live stream has already been clipped and shared across every major social media platform. By morning, it will have been seen by millions. By next week, tens of millions. And every single one of those viewers will know exactly what kind of people they're doing business with. Jonathan stepped forward, fear temporarily overcome by indignation, by the desperate need to assert some control over a situation that had spun so far beyond his grasp he could barely see it anymore. Now wait just a minute. We made a mistake, fine. But you can't just what, Jonathan? Marcus turned his full attention to the younger man. watched him wilt under the scrutiny. You can't ruin us over one bad night? One bad night. Marcus's voice went quiet, dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded explosions. Is that what you think this was? Let me tell you about bad nights, Jonathan. A bad night is sitting in a hospital room watching your wife die by inches while your 6-year-old daughter asks why mommy won't wake up. A bad night is explaining to that little girl that she'll never see her mother again. A bad night is lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if you're strong enough to raise a child alone. He stepped closer to Jonathan, who retreated until his back hit the wall, until he had nowhere left to go. Tonight wasn't a bad night for you. Tonight was a revelation. Tonight was the night the world saw behind the curtain and discovered that the great Sterling family is nothing but a collection of bullies who punch down at people they consider inferior. That's not fair. Vanessa spoke up from her corner, her voice carrying the petulant edge of someone who'd spent her entire life believing fairness meant getting what she wanted. We're not bad people. We just didn't know. Didn't know what? Marcus turned to face her. Didn't know you should treat service workers like human beings? Didn't know that assaulting strangers was wrong? Didn't know that publicly humiliating people for entertainment was cruel? He shook his head, the gesture heavy with disappointment. You knew all of those things. You just didn't care because you never thought there would be consequences. There shouldn't be consequences. Edward's voice hardened, steel entering the tone for the first time since Marcus had entered the room. Not like what you're threatening. Mr. Hayes, let me be direct. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But you're also a businessman. You know that following through on your threats would hurt you as much as it would hurt us. Would it? The contracts between our companies are mutually beneficial. Your supply chain needs our distribution network. Our manufacturing needs your materials. Destroying that relationship destroys value for both sides. You're right. Marcus admitted it freely, watching Edward's shoulders relax fractionally at this first sign of potential compromise. Terminating our contracts would cost me approximately $300 million in the short term. Edward's relaxation deepened, tension flowing out of him like water from a broken dam. Then surely, but it would cost you everything. The relaxation vanished, replaced by something colder, something that recognized the calculation had been wrong from the start. You see, Mr. Sterling, that's the difference between us. $300 million would hurt me. It would be painful. It would set back some of my initiatives by years. But I would survive. My company would survive. My daughter would still have a father who could provide for her. Marcus began to pace slowly around the room, his footsteps the only sound, each step a countdown to something none of them wanted to face. Your family, on the other hand, Sterling Medical Supply depends on my materials for 34% of its production. Without me, you'd have to find new suppliers, which would take 6 months minimum, assuming you could find anyone willing to work with you after tonight's video goes viral in the business community. He stopped near the window, looking out at the city lights, at Manhattan sprawling beneath him like a circuit board, billions of dollars flowing through channels most people never saw. In those 6 months, you'd miss delivery deadlines on contracts worth approximately $800 million. The penalty clauses alone would bankrupt you. And that's before we consider the reputational damage of being associated with the family that assaulted a grieving widower at a children's cancer charity. You wouldn't dare. Jonathan's voice cracked on the last word, all his bravado collapsing under the weight of numbers he couldn't argue with, consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. Wouldn't I? Why not? What exactly do I have to lose? My reputation? I'm a self-made billionaire who works as a janitor to teach his daughter humility. The public will love me. My contracts? I have relationships with 47 other companies who would be happy to replace Sterling Medical Supply. My peace of mind? Marcus turned back to face them, his expression carved from ice and absolute certainty. I lost that when your family decided I wasn't human enough to deserve basic respect. Please. Victoria's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense, all performance. Please, Mr. Hayes. Marcus. I have children. I have grandchildren. You can't destroy our family over one mistake. One mistake. Marcus's voice was tired now, carrying the weight of every interaction he'd watched, every cruelty he'd witnessed, every moment of casual dehumanization he'd observed while pushing his janitor's cart through hotel hallways. Mrs. Sterling, I've been watching your family all night. The way you speak to servers, the way you ignore the cleaning staff, the way you look through people who aren't wealthy enough to matter to you. Tonight wasn't a mistake. Tonight was pattern. It's not, Vanessa insisted, finally putting down her phone, finally engaging with something beyond her screen. It's not a pattern. We were raised to... To what? Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Catherine, at Jonathan, at Edward. None of them offered help. None of them had answers that would make this better. We were raised to know our place, to understand the hierarchy, to protect our position.
And who taught you that your position was threatened by a man in a target suit?
Vanessa had no answer. The silence stretched until it became its own accusation. Senator Richard Sterling cleared his throat, the sound deliberate, calculated to draw attention without demanding it. He'd been silent since Marcus entered the room, watching, calculating, running political scenarios through his mind like equations. Mr. Hayes, Marcus, may I speak frankly? You haven't earned that right. Perhaps not. But I'm going to speak frankly anyway. The senator moved to stand near Edward, presenting a united front, 2 generations of power and privilege, trying to find the leverage that would move this situation back towards solid ground. You're right about everything. We behaved badly. We treated you with contempt. We made assumptions based on your appearance and your job title. All of that is true. Go on. But here's what's also true. Destroying our family won't undo what happened.
It won't erase the humiliation you felt.
It won't bring back the dignity we stripped from you. All it will do is create more pain. For us, yes, but also for the thousands of people who depend on our companies for their livelihoods. Marcus said nothing, letting the senator continue, giving him enough rope to either pull himself up or hang himself with. Sterling Medical Supply employs 9,000 people across 7 states. Sterling Holdings manages properties that house 12,000 tenants. Our charitable foundations, and yes, I know how hollow that sounds right now, support programs that serve 40,000 disadvantaged children every year. The senator's voice softened. Decades of political instinct telling him this was the moment to show humanity, to create connection, to find the emotional lever that would move his opponent. If you destroy us, all of those people suffer.
Is that really what you want? Are you seriously trying to use your employees as human shields?
I'm trying to point out that your revenge would have collateral damage far beyond this room. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable, his thoughts invisible behind eyes that had learned to hide calculation behind careful neutrality. Senator, do you know why I became a janitor? You said it was to teach your daughter about work ethic. That's part of it, but there's more. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the posture almost casual except for the tension running through his shoulders. When I was building health tech AI, I worked 20-hour days for 3 years straight.
I was so focused on success, so consumed by the need to prove myself, that I almost missed the most important thing in my life. Your wife. My wife. Elena was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer the same month I closed my first $100 million funding round.
I wanted to step back, focus on her, be there for every treatment, every doctor's appointment. She wouldn't let me. Marcus's voice grew rough, each word fighting its way past something heavy lodged in his throat. She said, "Marcus, you're building something that will help people, something that will save lives. Don't stop because of me." So I didn't. I kept building. I kept working. And every moment I spent in boardrooms and negotiations was a moment I didn't spend with her. Catherine was watching him now with something that might have been genuine empathy, her earlier panic giving way to the realization that the man she'd assaulted carried burdens she couldn't imagine. She died on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a conference call with investors when my mother-in-law called. I told the investors I had to go. They asked if it could wait until we finished discussing the term sheet. Marcus laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. I hung up on them and drove to the hospital. I was 20 minutes too late. Elena died alone while I was talking about stock options. The room was absolutely silent, even Vanessa's phone quiet for the first time since Marcus had entered. After the funeral, I didn't know how to be a father. I'd never really learned. I'd been too busy building an empire. But I had this little girl, this terrified, grieving little girl who needed me, who had no one else. Marcus pushed off from the wall and walked slowly toward Catherine, each step measured, deliberate. So I started working as a janitor, not because it teaches work ethic, although it does, but because it taught me something else. It taught me how to be present, how to do simple, honest work that doesn't matter to anyone except the people who use the floors I clean. It taught me that I don't have to be the most important person in the room. It taught me to see people I used to look right through. He stopped directly in front of Catherine's chair.
And it taught me how the other half lives, Mrs. Sterling. It taught me what it feels like to be dismissed, to be ignored, to be treated like I'm invisible, like I'm less than human. Catherine couldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the table, on her hands, on anything except the man standing over her. I've been spit on by drunk hotel guests. I've been accused of stealing by paranoid tourists. I've been called names I won't repeat in this room. And every single time I've thought about my daughter, about what kind of world she's inheriting, about what kind of people she'll have to navigate. Marcus crouched down so he was at eye level with Catherine, forcing her to either look at him or make the deliberate choice to look away. Tonight, Mrs. Sterling, you showed me exactly what kind of person you are, and I have to decide what to do about that. Catherine's voice was barely audible, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. What? What do you want from us? I don't know yet. I genuinely don't know. Part of me wants to burn it all down. Part of me knows that won't actually fix anything. Part of me just wants to go home and hold my daughter and forget this night ever happened. Then do that. Jonathan said it quickly, desperately, grasping at the possibility of escape like a drowning man reaching for a rope. Go home. Forget about it. We'll issue apologies. We'll make donations. We'll do whatever you want. Just please don't destroy everything our family has built. Everything your family has built. Marcus stood up, looking down at Jonathan with something between pity and contempt. Bradley, what exactly have you built? Your grandfather built this empire. Your father maintained it.
You've spent your entire life coasting on their achievements while treating everyone beneath you like dirt. That's not— Don't! Marcus held up a hand, the gesture small but absolute. Don't lie to me. I've read your performance reviews. I've seen your expense reports.
I know exactly how many hours you work and how much value you create. The answer to both is not nearly enough. Jonathan's face went pale, blood draining away to leave something waxy and corpse-like. How do you know about my performance reviews? Because I make it my business to know everything about the companies I work with. Did you really think I'd invest hundreds of millions of dollars without understanding exactly who I was partnering with? Edward leaned forward, his hand still folded on the table, his expression carefully neutral. If you knew all of this, why did you continue working with us? Why not take your business elsewhere years ago? Because business relationships aren't about liking people, Mr. Sterling. They're about mutual benefit. Your company was efficient. Your products were quality. Your distribution network was exactly what I needed. Marcus paused, letting the past tense settle over the room like ash. I was willing to overlook your family's character flaws as long as they didn't directly affect me.
And now they have. Yes, now they have. Marcus walked toward the door, his hand reaching for the handle. I'm going to go home now. I'm going to think about what happened tonight. And tomorrow morning I'm going to make some decisions. What kind of decisions? Catherine's voice trembled, each word fighting past fear to reach air. The kind that will determine whether your family has a future. Marcus opened the door, cool air from the hallway rushing in to fill the vacuum of tension. Enjoy your evening. He walked out, leaving them in the boardroom, leaving their panic and their desperation and their sudden understanding that money couldn't solve every problem. Behind him, the silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in a cascade of blame and fear and desperate attempts to find a solution to a problem that had no easy answers.
Marcus didn't hear them. He was already thinking about Sophie, about what he would tell her in the morning, about the promise he'd made to Elena all those years ago in a hospital room that still haunted his dreams. Don't let her become like the families we used to envy. The question was simple. The answer was not. What was he willing to do to keep that promise? He stepped out into the November night, took a deep breath of air that tasted like freedom and consequences in equal measure, and pulled out his phone. 47 missed calls, 312 text messages. His inbox was exploding, the digital world catching fire while he'd been in that boardroom negotiating with people who just discovered that their assumptions had been weapons pointed at their own feet. But there was only one number he wanted to dial, one voice he needed to hear, one person who mattered more than all the revenge and justice and righteous anger combined. He pressed the contact labeled home and waited. Daddy? Sophie's sleepy voice came through after 2 rings, thick with the exhaustion of staying up past her bedtime, waiting for him to come home, refusing to sleep until she knew he was safe. Is the party over? Marcus felt his throat tighten, emotion rushing up from somewhere deep and unguarded. Almost, sweetheart. Almost. I just wanted to hear your voice. Did you have fun? Marcus looked back at the museum, at the chaos visible through the windows, at the 243,000 people watching the Sterling family's destruction unfold in real time, at the security guards and lawyers and politicians scrambling to contain damage that couldn't be contained. It was educational. Go back to sleep, baby. I'll be home soon. Okay, Daddy.
I love you. I love you too, Lily. More than anything in the world.
He hung up and stood there for a long moment, the phone pressed against his chest, feeling his heart beat through the device, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect thousands of lives, feeling the responsibility of having power and having to choose how to use it. Then he started walking toward the Honda parked 3 blocks away, toward home, toward Sophie, toward whatever tomorrow would bring. He had a lot to think about before morning, and morning was coming, whether he was ready or not. The walk to his car took 7 minutes. The drive home took 43. He arrived at his house in Connecticut just after midnight, parking the Honda in the driveway next to his mother's Subaru. The lights were still on in the kitchen, his mother visible through the window, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. Probably talking to her sister. Probably processing the night's events through the filter of maternal concern and barely suppressed, "I told you so." Marcus didn't go inside immediately. Instead, he sat in the car, watching his breath fog the windshield, watching the condensation form and fade with each exhalation, finding something meditative in the rhythm. His phone buzzed. Patricia Chen, Sterling Legal. He declined the call. It buzzed again 30 seconds later, same number. He declined it again. The third time it rang, he answered. "Yes, Miss Chen?" "Mr. Hayes." Patricia's voice was carefully controlled, professional neutrality wrapped around whatever panic she was feeling. "The family would like to schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. They're prepared to offer—" "I know what they're prepared to offer. The answer is no." "Mr. Hayes, please, just hear—" "Mrs. Chen, I appreciate that you're doing your job, but I'm not interested in negotiating tonight. Tell your clients I'll contact them when and if I'm ready to have a conversation. Until then, they should spend their time thinking very carefully about what they did and why they did it." He hung up before she could respond. The kitchen door opened and his mother stepped out, wrapped in a cardigan against the November cold, her face creased with concern. "Marcus?" He got out of the car, walked to her, let her pull him into a hug that felt like safety and childhood and the certainty that someone would always be on his side, no matter what. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet, Mom. Ask me tomorrow." She pulled back, studying his face with the intensity only mothers could manage, reading things he hadn't said, seeing things he'd tried to hide. "What happened?" Marcus told her. Not everything, not the details, but enough. The assault, the revelation, the boardroom, the threats, the decisions waiting for him in the morning like landmines buried in his path. His mother listened without interrupting, without offering advice, just being present in the way Elena had taught him to be present, the way he was trying to teach Sophie. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What would Elena want you to do?" That's the question I've been asking myself all night. And I think she'd want me to be better than they are. But I'm not sure what that looks like yet. His mother squeezed his hand. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Marcus wasn't sure he believed that, but he appreciated the faith anyway. He kissed her forehead, told her to go home and get some sleep, promised he'd call her in the morning. After she left, he went inside, moving quietly through the house, checking locks and turning off lights, the small domestic rituals that grounded him in normalcy. Sophie's door was open, the way she always left it, afraid of the dark in ways she wouldn't admit during daylight hours. He stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her sleep. Mr. Whiskers clutched against her chest, one leg kicked free of the blankets, her face peaceful in a way that made his heart ache with the need to protect her from everything the world might do to damage that peace. Tomorrow he would make decisions. Tonight,
He would just be her father, standing guard against nightmares and the kind of cruelty that came dressed in expensive clothes and charitable foundations. His phone buzzed one more time. He almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail, almost preserved this moment of peace for just a little longer. But something made him look at the screen. David Chen, his personal attorney, his friend since law school, the person who'd helped him structure every major deal he'd ever made. Marcus answered. "David, it's late." "I know. I'm sorry, but you need to see something." "What?" "The video. It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, every major news outlet has picked it up. CNN is running it on loop. You're trending worldwide." Marcus closed Sophie's door gently, walked downstairs to his office, fired up his laptop. The screen filled with his own face, champagne-soaked and calm. Catherine Sterling's hand frozen mid-slap in dozens of thumbnails. 300 million views across all platforms in 4 hours. The comments are, well, they're intense. Marcus scrolled through them, watching the digital world process what had happened, watching people he'd never met form opinions about people they'd never know, watching the story transform from truth into narrative, into myth. "David, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need options. All of them. Full termination of all Sterling contracts. Partial termination with conditions. Renegotiation with penalty clauses. Public statements. Private settlements. Legal action for the assault. Everything." "Marcus, are you sure about this? Once you trigger these clauses, there's no going back." "I'm not sure about anything. That's why I need the options. I'll have something for you by morning. Thank you." "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "For what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right." Marcus wasn't sure what exactly right meant in this context, but he appreciated the support anyway. They hung up and Marcus sat in his office until 3 a.m, reading comments, watching the story spread, seeing himself transformed into a symbol of something larger than the actual events, larger than the actual people involved. The poor rising up against the rich, the worker against the elite. David versus Goliath, except David was secretly a giant too, and Goliath was about to learn that rocks hurt, regardless of who threw them. At 3:15, Sophie appeared in his office doorway, Mr. Whiskers dragging behind her, sleep clinging to her like cobwebs.
"David, why are you still awake?"
"Just working, sweetheart."
"You look sad."
"Do I?"
She nodded, padding across the carpet to climb into his lap, all warm weight and unconditional love, and the certainty that her father could fix anything. "Did something bad happen at the party?" "Some people were mean to me." Sophie's face scrunched up in the way it did when she was processing something that didn't make sense. "Were they mean like when Tommy Parker said my lunch was stupid?" "Kind of like that, but worse." "Did you tell them it's wrong to be mean?"
"I did."
"And did they say sorry?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They said sorry because they found out Daddy is important, not because they actually felt bad about what they did." Sophie considered this with the devastating clarity that only children possessed, cutting through complexity to reach the truth underneath. "That's not a real sorry."
"No, it's not. So what are you going to do?" Marcus looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes staring back at him, at the innocence he was desperately trying to protect, and the wisdom he was accidentally teaching her. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "What do you think Mommy would tell me to do?" Sophie didn't hesitate, didn't need time to think, just spoke the truth as she understood it, with absolute certainty. Mommy would say that hurting people back doesn't make the hurt go away. She would say that being better is better than being mean. Marcus felt tears sting his eyes, emotion overwhelming the careful control he'd maintained all night. He pulled Sophie into a tight hug, pressing his face into her hair, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "When did you get so smart?" "I'm 8, Daddy." 8 is very smart. Yes, it is." He carried her back to bed, tucked her in with Mr. Whiskers, kissed her forehead. She was asleep again before he left the room, trust absolute, certainty complete that her father would make the right choice, because fathers always did in her world. Marcus stood in the hallway outside her room, listening to her breathe, and made his decision. Morning arrived with David Chen standing on Marcus's doorstep at 6:30, still in yesterday's suit, carrying 3 laptops and a briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was crooked, and he smelled like the kind of coffee that came from gas stations at 4 in the morning. "I didn't sleep." David pushed past Marcus into the kitchen, spreading documents across the counter like a general planning an invasion. "You need to see what happened overnight." The numbers were staggering. 473 million views across all platforms, trending #1 in 62 countries. Sterling Medical Supplies stock had dropped 18% in after-hours trading. 3 board members had already resigned. Senator Sterling's campaign office had been flooded with 12,000 calls demanding his resignation. Vanessa had lost 600,000 followers in 6 hours. And this. David pulled up an email chain, messages flying back and forth between Sterling's legal team, their PR consultants, their crisis management specialists. Panic distilled into corporate language, desperation dressed up as strategy. They're offering everything. Full public apology from every family member. 75 million in donations to organizations of your choosing. Complete restructuring of corporate diversity initiatives. Catherine's resignation from all board positions. Jonathan stepping down from his executive role. Whatever it takes. Marcus read through the proposals, watching his attorney's tired eyes for some signal about what he should do, some indication that there was a right answer buried in all this noise.
"What do you think?" David was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that came before difficult truths.
"I think they're terrified. I think they know you can destroy them. And I think the question isn't what they're offering, but what you're willing to accept." Sophie wandered into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at the laptops, at the documents, at David's exhausted face. "Mr. Chen, why are you here so early?" "Just helping your dad with some work stuff, kiddo." "Is this about the mean people?" David glanced at Marcus, eyebrows raised. "She knows?" "She knows enough." Sophie climbed onto a stool, swinging her legs. "Daddy says he has to decide what to do about them." "That's right. Mommy would say you should give them a chance to be better." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena's philosophy channeled through their daughter's voice, uncomplicated and absolute. David looked between them, understanding dawning across his exhausted features. "You're not going to destroy them, are you?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He thought about Catherine's tears, about Jonathan's fear, about Vanessa's collapsing empire, about Senator Sterling's political career hanging by threads. He thought about the 9,000 employees at Sterling Medical, about the 12,000 tenants in Sterling Properties, about the 40,000 children whose programs depended on Sterling charitable foundations. And he thought about Elena, about her last coherent words before the morphine took her somewhere he couldn't follow. Be the man Sophie needs, not the man the world expects. Set up the meeting. The Grand View Hotel, Conference Room B, noon, today.
David nodded, already typing on his phone, already making it happen.
And what are you going to tell them? Marcus looked at Sophie, at her complete faith that he would do the right thing, at her certainty that right things existed and could be done. I'm going to give them the chance to prove Mommy was right. The Sterling family arrived at the Grandview Hotel at 11:45, 15 minutes early, desperation making them punctual in ways wealth never had. Marcus knew because Raymond texted him the moment their cars pulled up. 5 of them, plus 3 lawyers. They look like they haven't slept. The old lady keeps crying. Marcus waited in the basement locker room, changing out of his street clothes into his janitor's uniform. The gesture was deliberate, calculated to remind them exactly who they'd assaulted, exactly what they'd despised, exactly what assumptions had led them to this moment. Raymond found him buttoning the gray shirt with the hotel logo. Man, you really going to make them look at you like this? I want them to see what they saw, not what they know now. That's cold. That's honest. Marcus took the service elevator up to the conference room level, walked through the hallways he'd mopped 1,000 times, past the spaces where he'd been invisible to people who now desperately needed him to see them. He paused outside conference room B, took a deep breath, straightened his uniform. Then he walked in. The effect was immediate and devastating. Catherine's face crumpled the moment she saw him, all the composure she'd managed to reconstruct overnight dissolving at the sight of Marcus in the uniform she'd mocked. Jonathan actually flinched, stepping backward into the wall. Vanessa's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone. Senator Sterling's cane slipped from his fingers, clattering against the floor. Only Edward remained still, watching Marcus with eyes that had seen this play before, that recognized theater when it walked through the door. Mr. Hayes. Patricia Chen rose from her seat, professional neutrality cracking slightly at the edges. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I haven't agreed to anything yet. Marcus pulled out a chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down, his uniform a stark contrast to their designer suits and desperate eyes. David took the seat beside him, laptops already open, documents already queued. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, until someone had to break or scream or do something to make it stop. Edward broke first. Mr. Hayes, we've had the night to reflect on what happened, and we've come prepared to make things right. Have you? Yes. Edward slid a folder across the table, the motion smooth despite his age, decades of boardroom negotiations teaching him exactly how to present an offer. This is our proposal. Full public apology from every family member involved. $75 million in donations to civil rights organizations of your choosing. Complete restructuring of our corporate diversity initiatives. Catherine's resignation from all charity board positions. Jonathan stepping down from his executive role at Sterling Medical. Whatever it takes. Marcus didn't touch the folder, didn't even glance at it. Mrs. Sterling, look at me. Catherine raised her head slowly, her eyes red-rimmed, her face bare of makeup, every year of her age visible in the morning light filtering through the conference room windows. Tell me why you did it. I told you. I thought you were— No, not what you thought I was. Tell me why you thought it was acceptable to treat any human being that way. Tell me where you learned that behavior. Tell me who taught you that some people deserve respect and others don't. Catherine's hands trembled on the table, fingers twisting together like they were trying to strangle each other. I don't know how to answer that. Try. The room waited, 400 million viewers worth of consequences pressing down on her shoulders,
the weight of her entire life condensed into this single moment of forced honesty. I grew up. She stopped, started again, each word pulled from somewhere deep and painful. My father was a banker. Old money. Very traditional. He used to say there were two kinds of people in the world, people who mattered and people who didn't, and you could tell which was which by how much money they had. Go on. I married into the Sterling family when I was 22. Philip, my husband, Edward's son, he was even worse than my father. He would humiliate waiters in restaurants, fire staff for looking at him wrong. He taught our children that the world existed to serve them. Catherine's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face unchecked. Philip died 8 years ago. Heart attack. And I became him. I became everything I hated about him because I didn't know how else to survive in this world he'd built around me. And your children? Catherine looked at Jonathan and Vanessa, pain and guilt warring across her features. I failed them. I taught them the same poison my husband taught me. I created. She couldn't finish, the words too terrible to speak aloud. You created exactly what Mr. Hayes said you created. Edward's voice was quiet but firm, the patriarch finally acknowledging what he'd allowed to happen under his watch. You created bullies. We all did. Marcus turned his attention to Jonathan. Your turn. Jonathan's jaw tightened, pride and fear fighting for control of his expression. What do you want me to say? The truth. Like your mother just gave me. The truth is, Jonathan's voice faltered, his eyes finding his grandfather's face, searching for permission or absolution or escape. Edward's expression gave him nothing. The truth is, I'm terrified. I'm 35 years old, and I've never accomplished anything on my own. Everything I have, my job, my apartment, my car, my life, it was given to me. And I'm so scared of losing it that I've become exactly the kind of person I used to hate. What kind of person is that? Weak. The word came out like a confession pulled from somewhere Jonathan hadn't known existed until this moment. I'm weak. So I pretend to be strong by tearing down people who can't fight back. Last night when I saw you in that cheap suit, I thought finally someone I can feel superior to. Because I don't feel superior to anyone. I feel like a fraud every single day. Vanessa started crying quietly, her phone forgotten on the table, her empire of followers and content and carefully constructed persona reduced to nothing by her brother's honesty. My sister is the same way. We both are. Jonathan reached over and took Vanessa's hand, the gesture small and human and completely unlike the people they'd been 12 hours ago. We post our perfect lives on social media, and we buy things we don't need, and we treat people like garbage, because if we stop for 1 second, if we actually look at ourselves, we'll see that there's nothing there. Just empty people in expensive clothes. Marcus turned to Vanessa. Do you agree with your brother? Vanessa nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, mascara smearing across her skin. Last night, when I started that live stream, I didn't even think of you as a person. You were just content. Something to entertain my followers. Something to make me feel important. She looked down at the table, at her phone lying there like an accusation. I watched the video back this morning, all 3 hours of it, and I didn't recognize myself. That woman on the screen, that cruel, laughing woman, that's not who I thought I was. But it is who I am.
It's who I've become. Marcus sat with their confessions, letting them settle over the room like snow, covering everything in silence. Finally, he turned to Senator Sterling. And you, Senator, what's your truth?
Richard Sterling straightened his spine, drawing on 40 years of political experience to find the right words, the right tone, the right balance between honesty and self-preservation.
My truth, Mr. Hayes, is that I'm a politician. I've spent 40 years doing whatever was necessary to accumulate power and keep it. I've made deals with people I despised. I've supported policies I knew were wrong. I've looked the other way when my family acted badly because addressing it would have been inconvenient. That's not a confession. That's a resume. Perhaps. But it's honest. I'm not going to sit here and cry and tell you I've had some overnight transformation. I'm 74 years old. I am who I am.
Richard leaned forward, his expression hardening into something closer to the politician Marcus had watched navigate scandals and controversies for 4 decades. The question is whether you're going to destroy my family over a single evening's mistakes. Your family's mistakes go back decades, Senator. Yes, they do. But the consequences you're threatening would affect thousands of innocent people who had nothing to do with last night. Workers who need their jobs, tenants who need their homes, children who need the programs our foundations support. Richard's voice took on the cadence of a campaign speech, the practiced rhythm of someone who'd learned to move audiences toward desired conclusions. You can punish us. We deserve it. But do those people deserve it too? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression revealing nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph of Elena and Sophie, the same image he'd shown them last night. The 2 people who mattered more than revenge or justice or any of the complicated equations spinning through his head. My wife used to volunteer at a homeless shelter every Saturday morning, 6 a.m. until noon. She'd wake up before dawn, drive across town, and spend 6 hours serving food to people most of society had forgotten. He set the photograph on the table between them. I asked her once why she did it. Why she gave up her Saturday mornings when we had enough money to just write a check. You know what she said? No one answered. She said writing a check is easy. Showing up is hard. And people need to know that someone sees them, that someone thinks they matter. She said that every person who walked through those shelter doors had a story just as important as ours, and the least we could do was look them in the eye and treat them like human beings. Marcus looked around the table at each face, at Catherine's tears and Jonathan's fear and Vanessa's shame, and Richard's calculation and Edward's steady assessment. Last night, Mrs. Sterling, you looked me in the eye, but you didn't see a human being. You saw something beneath you, something to be discarded, something that threatened your sense of superiority just by existing in the same space. Catherine flinched, but didn't look away, holding his gaze despite the pain it caused. And now you want me to show mercy. You want me to consider the thousands of innocent people who would be affected by my decision. You want me to be bigger than my anger. Marcus stood up slowly, the janitor's uniform somehow carrying more authority than any suit he'd ever worn. I've spent all night thinking about what my wife would want me to do, what my daughter deserves to see from her father, what kind of man I want to be when I look in the mirror. He walked to the window, looking out at the city below, at the millions of people navigating their own complicated equations of power and mercy and justice. Here's what I've decided. The room held its breath, careers and fortunes and futures hanging on whatever words came next. I'm not going to destroy your family. Catherine let out a sob of relief,
her whole body sagging like strings had been cut. Jonathan slumped in his chair. Vanessa grabbed her mother's hand. Richard's shoulders dropped fractionally, tension bleeding out after hours of holding it in. But I'm not going to let this moment pass without consequences either. The relief froze on their faces, hope transforming back into fear in the space between heartbeats. Mrs. Sterling, you will resign from every charitable board you sit on, effective immediately. You will write personal letters to each organization explaining exactly why you're stepping down.
And you will spend the next 6 months volunteering. Actually volunteering, not just writing checks, at organizations that serve people you've spent your whole life looking down on. Catherine nodded quickly, desperately. Yes, anything. Jonathan, you will surrender your executive title at Sterling Medical Supply. You will spend 6 months working in entry-level positions throughout the company. Warehouse, customer service, delivery. Every position you've considered beneath you. And you will learn what it means to actually work for something. Jonathan opened his mouth to protest, looked at Edward, and closed it again. Fine. Vanessa, you will delete every piece of content from last night. You will record a full public apology, not a PR-crafted statement, but a real apology, explaining exactly what you did and why it was wrong. And your platform will spend the next 6 months exclusively promoting organizations that serve underrepresented communities. Vanessa nodded tearfully. Her empire of content and followers reduced to rubble. She'd have to rebuild from principles she was just learning existed. Senator, you will co-sponsor the Workplace Dignity Act. You will return every dollar of campaign contributions that trace back to my companies, and you will use your political influence to support policies you actually believe in, not just policies that benefit your donors. Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, recognizing when a battle was lost and choosing to preserve what he could. Marcus turned finally to Edward, to the patriarch who'd built this empire and watched his family use it as a weapon against anyone they considered weak. And you, Mr. Sterling, the man who built this dynasty and let it become this. Edward met his gaze steadily, 88 years of experience teaching him not to flinch. What do you want from me? I want you to change the culture. Not with press releases or diversity initiatives or corporate training programs. I want you to change how your family treats people. Every interaction, every day, starting now and continuing until the day you die. And if I refuse, then everything I said last night becomes reality. Every contract terminated, every relationship severed, every connection destroyed. Marcus's voice was quiet but absolute, carrying the weight of certainty that came from having nothing left to lose. I've spent my whole life building things, Mr. Sterling. I know exactly how to tear them down. The two men stared at each other across the conference table. Decades of business experience and billions of dollars in combined assets facing each other in this hotel conference room that Marcus cleaned 3 nights a week. Finally, Edward nodded. You have my word. Your word isn't worth much to me right now, but we'll see if you can make it worth something over time. Marcus picked up the photograph of Elena and Sophie and tucked it carefully back into his pocket. My attorney will send you detailed compliance requirements by end of business today. Every commitment you've made in this room will be documented, witnessed, and monitored. Any failure to comply triggers the consequences we discussed. He walked toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the handle. One more thing. The room waited. Raymond Jackson, the security guard your family had fired last night? You will personally apologize to him. You will reinstate his position with back pay, and you will create a scholarship fund in his name for the children of service workers. Catherine's voice was barely audible. How much?
$2 million minimum. Marcus opened the door, cool air from the hallway rushing in. I'll be watching all of you, and if I ever see any of you treat another human being the way you treated me last night. He looked back over his shoulder, his expression carved from something harder than stone. There won't be a second chance. He walked out, leaving them in the conference room with their relief and their terror and their sudden understanding that mercy came with strings attached, that forgiveness required transformation, that second chances had to be earned through the kind of work they'd spent their entire lives avoiding. Marcus didn't stop walking until he reached the basement locker room where Raymond was waiting, sitting on the bench in front of his locker, still in his security uniform from last night, too anxious to go home and sleep. Marcus, what the hell just happened? Marcus sat down beside his friend, exhaustion finally catching up after running on adrenaline and righteous anger for 16 hours. I gave them a chance to be better than they are. And you think they'll take it? I don't know, but Elena would have wanted me to offer it. Raymond was quiet for a moment, processing. So what happens now? Now we wait. We watch. We see if people can actually change when they have to. And if they can't? Marcus thought about Sophie, about her absolute certainty that being better was better than being mean, about her faith that people could choose kindness over cruelty if someone just gave them the chance. Then at least we'll know we tried. His phone buzzed. David Chen, subject line, "You're not going to believe this." Marcus opened the email. Video clips, dozens of them, people all over the country recording themselves at work. Janitors and servers and delivery drivers and retail workers and warehouse employees and everyone who'd ever been made invisible by people who thought job titles determined human worth. They were posting tributes, sharing their own stories, creating a movement that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with what his moment had revealed about how society treated the people who kept it running. Raymond leaned over to look at the screen, watching the videos multiply in real time. Man, you started something. I didn't start anything. I just refused to be invisible when someone tried to make me disappear. That's the same thing. Marcus stood up, began changing out of his janitor's uniform for the last time in a while. He'd be back, eventually. The work mattered too much to abandon, and Sophie still needed to learn that showing up was harder and more important than any check he could write. But first he needed to go home, needed to make his daughter midnight pancakes in the middle of the day, needed to tell her that sometimes being better really was better than being mean, even when being mean felt easier and safer and more immediately satisfying. His phone rang again. Patricia Chen. He answered. Yes? Mr.
Hayes, the family has reviewed your terms. They accept. All of them. Unconditionally. Good. Tell them I meant every word about monitoring and consequences. I will. And Mr. Hayes? Yes? Thank you. For giving them a chance they probably don't deserve. Everyone deserves a chance, Mrs. Chen. That's kind of the whole point. He hung up and finished changing, folding the gray uniform carefully, placing it in his locker. Raymond watched him with something between admiration and concern. You really think they can change? Marcus thought about Catherine's tears and Jonathan's confession and Vanessa's shaking hands and Richard's political calculations and Edward's steady gaze. Thought about how easy it was to be cruel and how hard it was to choose kindness when cruelty had worked for so long. I think transformation is possible for anyone willing to do the work. The question is whether they'll keep doing it after the monitoring period ends. And you'll be watching every single day. Marcus closed his locker, spun the combination, and walked toward the exit. He had pancakes to make,
and a daughter to hug, and a promise to keep to a woman who'd taught him that showing up mattered more than anything else in the world. Behind him, Raymond called out, "Marcus?" He turned back. "Elena would be proud of you." Marcus felt his throat tighten, emotion rushing up from depths he'd tried to keep controlled. "Thanks, Raymond. That means everything." He walked out into the afternoon sun, into a world that had changed overnight in ways both visible and invisible, into whatever came next with the certainty that he'd made the choice that mattered most. Not revenge, not destruction, not the easy satisfaction of watching the powerful fall, but the harder, slower, more uncertain work of believing people could be better than they'd been, of giving them the tools and the consequences and the motivation to actually try. Sophie was right. Being better was always better than being mean, even when being mean would have been so much easier.